What is the worst business decision you've ever seen? Story 1. Holy hell, my time to shine. Prepare for a number of them. Used to work at the corporate office of a major water park in my state. If you ever lived in Utah, you know which one. The year before I started, they adopted a new business practice of offering a season pass to the water park and numerous other facilities for a measly $20 a year. Not a typo. Previously, they had been $150+ a year. Unbelievable, right? It gets worse. The year I started, they ran a new promotion where you buy a season pass for $25, but then also get a $20 gift card back in the mail to Walmart or some other store. You can see where this is going. 2 weeks after I started as a fulfillment specialist dealing with pass issues, they fired the entire call center staff of 30+ people, heaping their phone calls and emails onto my fulfillment team of 8. So in addition to all our work creating and shipping passes, we had to take all customer service calls and emails. It gets worse. For some reason, they thought it was prudent to wait until we had some large round number, I think either 500 or 1,000 passes ready to ship before they would even order the gift cards to send with them, even though there were thousands of passes purchased and pending with this deal. So not only were there massive delays in people getting their passes, sometimes they wouldn't even get the gift cards either because the season was starting and they demanded their passes now instead of waiting for the gift cards too. So double whammy there. Customers angry about how long it takes to get the season passes and not getting the gift cards. After all this and firing the call center, they couldn't figure out why they were still losing money. I quit, and the rest of the team quit as well within 2 weeks of me leaving. Somehow they kept afloat for another year or so, but then eventually the water park closed for a year or two and changed hands a few times. It was recently bought again, renovated, and the new company is offering season passes for $30. The circle of life, I suppose. I am usually for a low price, but in this case, they needed to do their research in the demand on this thing, and I just don't see how they could offer it for so low and keep up with it, especially if they're going to treat the people that are actually putting the passes and gift cards together so poorly. Awful. Story 2. Used to work for a small ma-and-pa pet supply store who never got with the times in terms of technology used and shady choices. They were still using registers where you had to manually punch in the price. They didn't know anything about email blasts. They created a regular email and had me spend 1 week sending out newsletters 73 at a time where I had to individually click on each of the 1,200 names on our list. They claimed the company, MailChimp or whatever, would get their customers' emails and sell them. Like Yahoo, Gmail, and Outlook couldn't do the same by that logic? But when customers complained about taking so long to get the email, they blamed me for it, saying I was taking too long to send them. They constantly picked products to bring in that were pretty much the exact same as the rest of the products. Chicken and rice dog food? We had 8 brands of that. What's one more? We had a large number of small animal customers who would walk out with nothing, but I think they only brought in a few new products maybe twice in 5 years. They would lie to vendors saying they sold more than they did to get more reimbursed during sales. They struggled financially, but expected me to bring in a bunch of new customers on a budget of 0. They never updated anything. I can guarantee the bathroom had mold behind the paneling. They also treated the feeder mice and rats pretty inhumanely. I mean, I get they're going to be eaten, but there were several times one would get injured, and they did nothing for the poor rat. One got its tooth stuck, and its face was ripped up pretty badly. They stuck it in another cage isolated with hard pellets, where it began to starve because it was too painful to eat. Every day I cleaned the cages. I would place some pellets in a tiny bit of water to turn it to mush. I offered it to the rat and he scarfed it down. He never bit me, nor did the other rat when I secretly disinfected his ear after it was ripped off by a dominant male. I hated that place, but stayed for the animals. When they falsely accused me of assaulting someone, but apparently waited 2 months to mention it, I left. I feel bad for the animals who suffer at their incompetent hands. Nobody is safe from these two. Oh, how do you stay so ignorant of everything? It just sounds like they were trying to have a business that was passive income. They didn't want anything to do with it except the money that they were collecting from it. I guess they were collecting enough to be happy enough with ignoring everything. Story 3. I worked for a design/printing place for years, and the owner went from amazing idea to stupid idea on a regular basis. Don't get me wrong, guy is a brilliant designer, totally took advantage of new tech every chance he could and made it work. But he was cheap and greedy, so ruined what would have been a lucrative long-term business relationships. So we did this huge order of promo supplies for a fairly big online casino. Huge for him, about a 20,000 order, with good margins, and the chance at long-term work with the company. While it was being picked up, on the spur of the moment, he decided to pad the bill by about $200. The guy picking it up was the son of the casino owner and literally watched the boss do this while I stood at the till. The customer looks at me, smiles, and pays the bill with a huge wad of cash and says, "I know it's not your fault, but my family is very wealthy. We didn't get that way by letting people rip us off. Tell the boss over in the corner he just conned himself out of a lot of money because we loved the work," in a voice meant to carry. My boss did this to Google years ago. We sell something they were hoping to use in their data centers. He kept giving them the runaround pricing-wise because he could smell the gold. They basically went, "Curse you, we're Google," and that's the story of why my boss has been awful for years. In front of them? This is why we need to have regulations against junk fees. I mean, this is just a really greedy person, but there are bigger companies, and I know you can name at least 1 or 2 off the top of your heads that do this on a regular basis. Story 4. My old company was intentionally known in our industry as being one of the ideal places to go. We could hire basically anybody in the world in our space to move and work in our office. It was such an absolutely awesome place to work. The CEO decided to cash out when a larger company barely related to our industry decided to buy us. The new company basically gutted everything that made it great, then rushed to go public. The employee stock options were pennies, and they drastically cut benefits. Every time there was a complaint, the answer was, "Maybe you don't understand our vision," or, "Well, we're a public company now." They also got rid of our office, which was located in one of the hottest LA neighborhoods that everybody loved. More than half of the OG senior members have left, and a large number of others are rumored to leave. I was forced to start assisting in hiring, and it was grueling. People would apply believing it was our old company, then find out what's up and go elsewhere. Oh, and the stock is plummeting. I hate the fact that what once was is over. Those jerks ruined something great. It sucks, but it's a pretty common practice in the business world. Buy a successful company, milk as much profit as you can by cutting employees and budgets by as much as you can, then sell it off and wipe your hands of it. Story 5. This one involves my dad. Back in the 80s, he decided he wanted to teach people how to use Lotus 123, Excel, MS Word, etc. So he bought a bunch of computers for a classroom, and he wrote interactive learning programs and printed out manuals and such. Even without advertising, he had people asking to join his class, but he was never quite ready. This Lotus 123 program could use more work. He wasn't ready for a class. This MS Word tutorial isn't quite done. The perfectionist in him wouldn't let him expose the less than perfect program/class to people. Just yet. He turned down paying customers for fear that it wasn't just perfect. He had taken a loan out from a friend to finance this, but never made a dime. He paid the loan back by selling our cottage, something he regrets to this day. And why? Because he was afraid to be flawed. That taught me a lesson, though. As the old saying goes, perfect is the enemy of done. He could easily have made money and taught his classes, refining the programs to student feedback. He could have covered deficiencies by teaching in person. He was afraid it wasn't perfect, so it was never done. We don't talk about it, or the cottage that we built together. We had the foundation and structure built by pros, then the whole family pitched in to build the interior when we were teens. It saddens me more because it was what he wanted to do, and he went for it, but not quite. My mom is the same way about not being able to move forward because it's not perfect. It's kind of infuriating, but it did teach me not to be that way in my own life. Story 6. I used to work for a company that was bleeding money. In order to try and save money, they decided to stop honoring returns/refunds, but still advertised that they did. Whenever someone would ask for a refund, you were supposed to tell the person that it would be processed in the next 6 to 8 weeks, then get them off the phone. 6 to 8 weeks later, when they ask where the money is, you were supposed to apologize and say the paperwork got put in the wrong stack and that it would be put in the correct stack and would then be processed in the next 6 to 8 weeks. If they complained about the length of time, you were supposed to tell them you can ask your supervisor to expedite it, and they should see it in 4 to 6 weeks instead. If they threatened legal action after months and months, you were supposed to tell them to contact the company legal department. We didn't have a company legal department, and then hang up on them. Then make a note in their account. No one should field calls from that account further. More than half the call center quit in a single week in protest of this decision. Company collapsed in on itself within a few months. There's a word for this. That word is fraud. Customer service people put up with a lot of trash from customers, and a lot of it is unfounded, but I can understand if someone's angry because of this. And it's amazing that it made half a call center quit in protest. I mean, it's not like you can't find another call center job. Story 7. Property management company I used to work for had a number of student properties and high-rises that were always a struggle to fill in the summer months when students went out of town. Head office came up with an offer that anyone who signed for 2 years got the 4 summer months at 50% off. Sounds like a good deal. 50% rent is much better than zero. We signed tons of students. However, the lease templates that head office sent over showed the reduced rent rate on the lease rather than just adding the discount as a separate addendum. I noticed this discrepancy and reported it and was subsequently ignored, which means the students were signing a legal document that guaranteed them 50% rent for 2 years. The company lost hundreds of thousands in revenue. Oh, that's rough. Story 8. Game shop in my area had a great business plan. They had regular tournaments and games and a sweet membership plan. $10 per month, and you get a discount on tournaments as well as a $10 gift card. Essentially, it just incentivized every single person who went there for any sort of event to spend a minimum of $10 per month. They did great for about 2 years, and then decided to change the membership so that you no longer got the $10 gift card, and the store started prioritizing D&D groups over competitive gaming groups. This isn't bad in theory, aside from the fact that D&D players weren't paying for entry and they tended to spend less money. So they essentially chased away the customers who spent the most while removing the incentive for anyone to subscribe. The number of customers they had per day did slightly increase, but the amount they were spending on average dropped significantly, and they went out of business shortly after. I love D&D, but if I ran a store and had to choose between it and something like Magic the Gathering, D&D would be on the cutting floor. Story 9. Knew this guy who wanted to start his own barbecue and hot sauce line. Here was his process. 1. Get high with buddies and make the decision to go into business together. 2. Argue about who should be financing the business. 3. Get a loan from grandma. 4. Order a bunch of bottles. 5. Use a Sharpie and some blank labels to put on the bottles. 6. Fill the bottles with bulk barbecue sauce. 7. Try and sell these to Walmart. 8. Get upset that Walmart won't shelve your sketch sauces. 9. Have several hundred bottles of unsealed product that wasn't prepared hygienically. 10. Try and sell some to your extended family. 11. Get angry with extended family that they don't believe in your dreams of the last 2 weeks. 12. Beg family for money to pay back grandma. Those people in my family usually skip the part where they pretend to try to pay grandma back. There was a line from the classic Mel Brooks movie, The Producers. Rule 1, never put your own money in the show. That's true of business as well. But using your family and trying to get money from them is almost never the way, especially if the consequence is you ostracize your family. Story 10. Around last year at this time of year, I know someone in their early 50s that sold all of their investments at a significant dip from the highs and decided to start producing and selling hand sanitizer in little bottles out of their garage, seeing it as a big opportunity with the virus. They spent everything on the bottles, labels, plastic drums full of sanitizer at a huge markup, hiring locals to fill the bottles and put the labels on, and then a website. By the time they had inventory, they realized they couldn't compete on price with places like Walmart or other big box stores that had finally caught up to the shortages by midsummer. They also didn't realize that selling on Amazon was gated for that category, so you had no chance of selling through there as a new seller. So now they basically have a garage full of old hand sanitizer and no savings. There's a saying about if you can see the profitability of an opportunity, it's too late to seize it. Forget who it came from, though. Story 11. I worked for a video store during the time Finding Nemo came out on DVD. The video store I worked for got a huge fish tank put inside. It was so big they had to shrink the game rental section. The tank had clownfish in it. The tank was also locked, and we couldn't feed the fish or clean it. This was supposed to be done by someone who I never saw come in. So the tank ended up filled with a bunch of dead Nemos in a nasty-as-hell tank. Needless to say, parents were very unhappy about it. The local paper did a small article about it too, which didn't help an already dying store. I have no idea what they thought an expensive-as-hell fish tank would do for their business. I call this the 95% method of failing at business. You do everything you need to do, coming up with ideas, securing funding, contacting suppliers, hiring help. Then, when everything is nearing completion, you drop the capitalism ball hard. This is very common. Story 12. There was a Tex-Mex place I loved in Fairbanks, Alaska. The food wasn't great, but it was consistent, and the prices were fair. Well, a new owner came in, and they decided to revamp it into a fine dining steakhouse. $30 was pretty much the lowest cost you could get for an item, and this was in a neighborhood that had a substantial crime rate and was right across the street from the bikini barista and the marijuana dispensary. I stopped going, and they went under shortly thereafter. I walked in once before the place closed down, and it was dreary and empty, and they had tried to bring some of the classics back to the menu, but it was far too late by then. You were too good for this world, Los Amigos. I don't know if the weirdest part of that story is the Tex-Mex place in freezing Alaska or the bikini barista. I would like to hear more about fine places. Wait till I come around from the dispensary, though. In Alaska. A bikini barista in Alaska. Was the name of the place Goosebumps?
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 13. There was a shopping plaza near me with a fairly large gift store. Not a gift shop in the museum sense. Basically like a Hallmark store, but independent. It wasn't exactly bustling, but they apparently did solid business, and a lot of people in the community really appreciated having it there as a place to buy gifts and wrapping paper and such. The owners of the shopping plaza raise rents to the point that the shop goes out of business. The reason this was stupid is that the storefront sat vacant for like 15 entire years. Seriously, this place closed when I was a child, and I'm now 27, and the vacancy was only taken over very recently. If their goal in raising the rent was to have a more profitable store move in that space, they certainly failed and missed out on decades of rent as a result. Story 14. Take a help desk that has been consistently rated extremely well by its customers for their first call resolve, attitude, and helpfulness. Outsource it to a company that's been rated towards the bottom of the list for over a decade because it costs less than the salary/benefits of your former in-house help desk. Then complain when your first call resolve drops through the floor and your customer satisfaction is at an all-time low. My memory on the details is probably sketchy, but this reminds me of Dell in its early days when they consistently got great ratings for their US-based support. Then they outsourced most of it overseas and almost instantly had the worst support known to the industry. Story 15. Insert Yahoo bad business decisions. 1998. Yahoo refuses to buy Google for $1 million. 2004. Yahoo tries to buy Google for $3 billion. Google asks for $5 billion. Yahoo refuses again. 2008. Yahoo turns down an acquisition offer from Microsoft for $40 billion. 2016. Yahoo sold to Verizon for $4.6 billion. And don't forget, they bought Tumblr for way too much and then immediately drove all its users away. Story 16. Two members of the band Steppenwolf wanted to break away from founder John Kay and wanted to tour using the band name. John Kay told them he would allow it only if they signed over their royalties from the songwriting credits they had in the band. The two members were convinced they would be successful on their own, so they agreed. Since Steppenwolf without John Kay would be like the Rolling Stones without Mick Jagger, that version of the band flopped tremendously. Also, even a 5-year-old could tell you that giving up your royalties on major hits like Born to Be Wild and Magic Carpet Ride would be a really stupid thing to do. So these guys ended up having to work regular menial jobs when they could have been getting a nice royalty check in the mail instead. And now, Kay is touring again under the name of a new band, which I was able to see for free about 3 years back. I respected the fact that they closed with The Pusher rather than Magic Carpet Ride. Story 17. Panera Cares opened less than a mile from my college campus. For those who don't know, Panera Cares basically just let you order food and would list a suggested donation based on what you ordered. But ultimately, it was an honor system. The cashiers would just make change for you so you could put cash in the donation box. If you can't afford a meal, it's fine to not pay, but you are supposed to volunteer to work for 2 hours to cover it. But this isn't actually required. I think, generally, these things are supposed to be for really affluent neighborhoods where people probably donate even more than is suggested. But students from the college basically turned it into a real-life tragedy of the commons experiment. There was almost never bread available because everyone would just take it. The lines were insane, and people would donate like $1, if anything. It closed within a year. There was one a block from my university, too. In downtown Boston, on top of that. Didn't last very long, but it was extremely helpful to college students while it lasted. Story 18. My late great-uncle started a fish and chips restaurant. He had his own unique recipe for the fish, and it was very popular. Businessmen had offered him thousands in cash for it over the years, but he always declined. After about 40 years or so, he decided to retire and hand the business over to an ambitious recent college grad. He offered to give her the recipe and even volunteer his services for a bit while she got comfortable in her new role as owner. She declined both, and within a year, she was forced to sell the restaurant after coming close to declaring bankruptcy. My great-uncle passed away and took the recipe with him to his grave. Story 19. I worked at Hollywood Video from 2006 to 2009. At the time, Netflix was growing by leaps and bounds, and our revenue was dwindling from year to year. Instead of copying Netflix's model and using their more recognizable brand name to edge them out of business, Hollywood shrugged their shoulders and continued renting single DVDs for $4.99 for 3 days plus late fees. Where are they at now? In my area, there's a Hollywood liquor store and a Hollywood service station, both former Hollywood Video locations where the new tenants kept the name and the sign. Story 20. There's a storefront in my city that opened mid-pandemic. They're a candy store. Simple enough, right? They advertise couture luxury candy. They have a store in the most high-traffic area of the city and therefore pay astounding rental fees. All they have is peach rings and gummy worms repackaged into glass jars with twist-off lids. Whoever decided to open this business must have no family who care enough about them to take them aside and be like, "Aunt Linda, this is a totally stupid idea." Story 21. My neighbor bought out his partners in a high-end furniture store. He used his house as collateral. Then the 2008 economic bust and housing bust happened, so not only did the company start tanking, but his house was no longer worth what it was before. He ended up losing the house. I remember the day he finally realized it went south. His wife knocked at the door and asked if I'd seen him. He left work and just disappeared for hours without telling anyone. I and other neighbors drove all around town looking for him. He eventually came back home, but I can imagine that he went somewhere and just cried it out for hours. He got a job soon after, but it was a bitter pill to swallow. There may have been shenanigans with the bookkeeping from the business partners where they cooked the books to look like things were better than they were. Maybe he knew. Maybe he didn't. Story 22. Circuit City was pretty stupid. When the recession hit, they decided to stop selling appliances and instead focus on DVDs and televisions and such. Appliances are known as recession-proof items. People always need refrigerators and microwaves. They don't need DVDs. They also wanted to cut down on labor costs, so they fired a lot of managers and assistant managers and just left a lot of entry-level employees because they were cheaper to pay. Well, entry-level employees don't really know how to fully run a store, so pretty much every Circuit City became dog feces. Story 23. An apartment maintenance employee had a hobby of bass fishing. He was pretty good at it, and then came up with the idea that if he drained his children's college fund, he could buy a new bass boat and pay for their college education with the money he would win in bass fishing tournaments. It didn't work out like he hoped it would. The way you wrote this, I can't tell if you're his coworker or one of his kids, or his ex-wife. Story 24. A developer my dad worked with sold off a beautiful piece of land next to a river in a very desirable area. He sold it to another developer. The new developer cut down every tree on the 6-acre site, as he said he wanted to see what he had. The land then started to slide into the river, rendering it worthless and ugly. As a land manager, ugh. Story 25. In the early days of the personal computer, a fairly prominent developer, Osborne, went belly up because they showed off their new model far in advance of when it was actually going to be available. So, predictably, dealers immediately canceled all orders for their current computer model in preparation for the new improved version. Inventory stacked up, and they were bankrupt before the new model ever came out. It's known as the Osborne effect. Essentially, since they were really nowhere close to ready on that new system, so they were relying on revenue from the existing one to fund development on the new one. Story 26. A family decided they wanted to open a small takeout shop in my hometown. It was a town of less than 5,000 people, so there were limited options. The family's brilliant business model was to buy day-old donuts from a nearby city's chain coffee shop and then resell them in town. There, of course, being a mom-and-pop bakery in the same town that made some of the most delicious donuts I've ever had. The day-old secondhand donuts were being sold at a higher price than the local bakery. Yeah. Story 27. Tumblr banning corn was a huge mistake that turned a relevant and highly profiting social platform into a barely known failure. It was worth more than $1 billion and got sold for $3 million. It took only a year for its traffic to disappear and the worth of the service to lose 99.9% worth. And the bot used to identify corn was a hilarious failure, especially since corn bots were still prevalent. It basically recognized flesh tones or long shapes, so basically everything and everything got tagged. The actual announcement post, a text post, was tagged as corn. It would be funny if it didn't completely destroy the entire website. Story 28. Cincinnati's deal with the Bengals. It has cost over $1 billion since 2000. It has some of the most ridiculous requirements for the city and is widely considered the worst business deal in the history of sports deals. The city hasn't remade anywhere close to $1 billion by having the team. Arguably, they've gained nothing. This is all while the Bengals are perennial stinkers. They've made being terrible a lucrative business model. Story 29. Cafe I work for decided it wanted to fire everyone except for the leads and the manager. Then told the manager they weren't paying her salary anymore and she needed to take on more work. Assumed people would do it because they love their jobs. So many small businesses get done over by a greedy owner. If the owner feels they deserve to get paid first and not last, they'll eventually go under when they hit a rough patch. Story 30. Kodak refused to push digital cameras/photography and instead focused on film cameras. If I recall correctly, I think Kodak was one of the first companies to create a digital camera, but instead of capitalizing on it, they sat on the technology and focused on film development. The number of technical innovations made by Kodak and then abandoned or given away is astounding, including the mouse and the first graphic user interface. Oh, never mind, I was thinking of Xerox. Story 31. In my hometown, there was an independent fast food and homemade ice cream place, long established and run by close friends. It was a gold mine. They decided to sell and retire. New owners immediately changed everything, painted it a wild color, removed some attractions on the grounds, changed the 60-year-old menu, and switched to commercially made ice cream. They lasted 8 months. Story 32. A radio station I used to listen to recently changed their format from 80% music, 20% talk show to 100% talk show. Then they were like, "Oh, you can still listen to the music, but it's only going to be on our app." Oh, talking. The only reason anyone turns on the radio. Story 33. Dig version 4. It buried the site. Dig was one of the most popular sites on the internet, and in a few short years, it was gone. Dig's loss was Reddit's gain, or loss, depending on how happy you were with the smaller pre-migration Reddit. Story 34. We had someone put in a restaurant, then kicked the fire marshal out because they didn't like what he said they had to do. They never opened up after building a brand new building. Story 35. After watching the movie Chef, my uncle left his job and put all his money into a food truck, only to learn our city banned food trucks.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.